Okay, so one thing I neglected to talk about is the MDM authority. And this goes around along with what I was talking about. The MDM stands for Mobile Device Management. MAM stands for Mobile Application Management. But I think they're doing away with that term and calling it more app protection. Microsoft is. So the MDM authority only needs to be set once. You can verify what it was set to in, I think it appears in more than one place, but if we look under device enrollment, just at the top here, you can see that this is the tenant name here, and the MDM authority of the tenant is Intune. That could be, that could have been set to multiple things. Right now, the Microsoft recommended way is to set it to Intune, but it could have, you can, some customers, when they first start getting into Intune, they at first have this set to Office 365 admin portal, I think, or something like that. I don't know. I've never actually worked with that, because usually by the time I'm involved, it's we're moving to Intune. But another option is to set SCCM hybrid management as your Intune authority, or in other words, you're basically turning over management of Intune to the to SCCM, and Microsoft has what's called hybrid management. Microsoft has always been big about having one pane of glass to manage your devices, right? So they don't like making their admins have to go to multiple places to manage devices. So one of the things they did was they introduced this hybrid mode with SCCM, so in SCCM they update SCCM 3 times a year if you're an SCCM user, and they put Intune things in that. And that's not going to matter for you guys. I just present it as an FYI, because we've chosen to do Intune as the MDM authority, which basically means we're doing it from the portal. This is where we're going to manage it, and we have opted to go the route of, the state of Arkansas has opted to go the route of more Intune management, rather than trying to manage, partially with SCCM. And that's mainly because there's all separate agencies that all have different needs and different management tools. Not everyone has SCCM, so you can't really go that route. But that's all for the best anyway, because Microsoft announced that that is being deprecated anyway, the hybrid management, and they're just going to stick with straight up Intune management. So good direction to go, because Microsoft is doing away with that. Anyways, I imagine because I think it makes it really difficult on the SCCM developers to keep up with all the changes that happen in Intune. Right, it's a lot harder to update an on-prem solution like SCCM versus Intune. They just have to update it on their side. They make updates a lot. You see a lot of things changing in the console quite often. So, anyway, so that is where the MDM authority is set. You won't need to do this. It's already set. Just as an FYI. Okay, so I referred to role-based access control before. Again, this access will be granted as part of Wave 4 that Trish was talking about. You can basically, when you set up role-based access control, you're setting up 3 main things. You're setting up who is going to do the managing. They're called the members, and who is going to be managed would be the second part of it, and they're the users. And then what permissions that this person, these members, will have, what in the console, what ways they'll be able to manage these different users, and what permissions they have inside the console. Now, this can either be set manually, or what we've done is we've set up a scripted method to do this that DIS is aware of, and it's been documented as well, the process for that. But it helps to automate that, because manually doing this for a lot of users would take a long time. So hence the scripted approach. But manually, what it looks like is if we go into Portal, again, I'm going to go to the top level to Intune, and if I go to Roles, you can see I'll go to All Roles here. And if I go to All Roles, you can see look at the roles. So you can see there's a lot of built-in roles, and that means that these roles have certain permissions assigned to them. We've created a custom role called Agency Intune Administrator, which will be where the permissions that you all receive. And then you can go in here and you can say under properties just has a little bit of information about the role, just basically naming it. There's not much to that one, but the permissions shows exactly what you are allowed to do in the console and what you're able to do to users and devices in way of management for those users. Assignments is where you determine if you create an assignment, that's where you set up the members and the scope or the targeted users that you're managing. So you can say members is this group, those are the admins, and then the scope are the people that I'm going to manage. Now the whole reason why we want to do this is because you don't want other agencies to be able to see your resources. So the idea is we want to keep that secure. You don't want them to be able to see them or manage them. That's the purpose behind that. Okay, so like I said, in order to manage a device, you does need to be enrolled into Intune. The enrollment process, it looks different depending on what platform we're talking about. Some platforms have more modern capabilities, and other platforms are more manual in how they need to be done. For example, with Windows 10, 1709 or later, we can enroll these devices using group policy. So if you set up these, and again this is all documented, but if you set up these policies, auto MDM enrollment with AAD token and registered domain join computers as devices, then that it will automatically enroll them in Intune. It does require that the machine already be joined to Azure AD, but that is being done by the other tool that I mentioned before, which is Azure AD Connect, which Azure AD Connect is running in your environment, and it's basically saying, okay, all of these computer accounts and user accounts that are sitting in your local on-prem AD, we're syncing those up. The groups as well and group membership, right? We're syncing those up to Azure AD, and so that's all up there. And so amongst those are computer accounts. So the computer accounts being synced that way, and then this group policy will be, you can use that to apply to your machines. That will then enroll them into Intune. Now, if you compare that to that's for Windows 10, 1709 or later, or is the only version that understands that group policy. For earlier versions of Windows 10, 1703 or earlier, they do not understand it, so they have to be installed. They have to be enrolled manually, and there is documentation around this. It shows the process with screenshots. In fact, these screenshots are pictures are taken from out of that documentation that shows how to do it. The main step is that you need to go into your settings, into your Access Work or School page, and just click Connect and put in your arkansas.gov account and then your password, and it enrolls the device. Now, one note here on Windows machines, we did run into a problem where originally when we were setting this up, there were DIS uses SCCM. Not every agency does, right? But DIS was using SCCM. They hadn't used it a lot. It wasn't something they'd made a lot of investments in, but there were SCCM clients on their machines, and Intune and SCCM client, you have to take certain steps to make them play nicely with each other. 2 or 3 years ago, you could flat out you could not install Intune on the same machine. And I say install, it's more like you're enabling MDM enrollment. You're not really installing anything on Windows 10 machines. On Windows 7 you're actually installing a client, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But when you have an SCCM client on the machine, it wants to do certain workloads, right? It wants to do app deployment and inventory collection and things like that. And so they kind of fight with each other a little bit. It's possible to let Intune have certain workloads, like in SCCM. It was updated to allow what's called coexistence. So you could say, flip a switch and say, hey, I'm going to let Intune have the app deployment workload. Now, that particular workload wasn't available until just a few months ago, or so. I don't remember exactly when, but that ability only became available just a while back. And so in order to let Intune take over those workloads, we actually had to uninstall the SCCM client. And so there's a CR created for this as well. If you're in that position where you need to uninstall the SCCM client, if you're going that route as well, then you can use the CR as a model. What we did was it basically copies 2 scripts to this folder on the C drive, and we created a scheduled task that runs the scripts. And one script uninstalls SCCM, the SCCM client. The other script runs a command that copies the SCCM log to a network share, where we can then look at that and say, okay, I see the log, and I looked at the log, and it's clean. It looks like it uninstalled the SCCM client successfully. So you can use that as a model if you're in that position. If you have SCCM and you're looking to make it coexist, just know that if you've got SCCM updated to the latest version, you should have the ability to let them coexist if you want to, and just use the sliders in Intune to decide which workloads each tool gets. Now, but for this, the rest of what I'm going to show you, the Office 365 deployment via Intune, for that to work, Intune has to have that app deployment workload, though, has to have control of that. Another thing about Windows 10 Intune Enrollment that we ran into that we want to make you aware of, in case you run into it as well, is that with certain machines, they failed the enrollment, and that's whether we were doing it manually or whether we were trying to do it through the group policy. It would fail either way. If you manually tried to do it, you would get this message that something went wrong, which obviously isn't very descriptive, but something went wrong. It won't enroll the device. And if you check inside your event viewer, and you go and look under user device registration, or there's also an AAD folder a little further up that has similar errors. It has errors that refer to FIPS. It says the TPM is attempting to execute a command only available when in FIPS mode, as if it has the TPM has to be in FIPS mode or not, right? Now, whether it was in FIPS mode or not, the TPM, we came across the error either way. So I don't think the error was even really telling us the truth. It wasn't being completely accurate. But regardless, where we would find that this was a problem was on TPM 1.2 machines, anything with a TPM 1.2 chip, which, if you're not familiar with it, TPM is Trusted Platform Module, and it's a chip on the motherboard that is used to store keys, and it interacts with encryption, a lot of encryption services, one in particular being BitLocker, right? BitLocker uses that to lock down recovery keys and stuff like that. So, so what we were having to do to get around this, and we opened up a ticket with Microsoft, and they weren't able to come up with a fix. They said, yeah, it needs to be fixed. This is a limitation. It's not necessarily just any TPM 1.2 chip. We only encountered on certain models, certain devices, so we think maybe it's just a particular brand and model of TPM that causes the issue. We didn't nail it down to one particular one that we could tell you, but it didn't always happen. But if it does happen, the way you have to get around it's a manual fix. You have to basically reboot the machine, go into the BIOS, disable the TPM, boot up, enroll the machine, and then re-enable the TPM, and then it's good. It just breaks the enrollment, but once you get past enrollment, Intune works fine with the TPM enabled. So that's just an FYI that has come up from time to time. There's a CR written for that process as well if you need guidance on that. The Intune enrollment, when you enroll the device, if you want to get access to the deployed apps, like when I was showing you that you could deploy apps as available, it does require that you use the company portal to get access to those apps. The company portal can be installed through the Microsoft Store, or we also have it, we've synchronized the Microsoft Store with Intune so that products that we've designated show up in Intune and can be deployed through the app that way as well. So another option is to deploy it, the company portal through Intune. And I know that could be important because a lot of people have locked down their Microsoft Store, so which is a pretty typical thing for people to do because it's very consumer oriented, and so most people don't want people going in there and just installing applications from out of there. But it can be deployed through Intune as well. Intune Enrollment for iOS. Again, these are screenshots from the CR that documents the process with screenshots and everything from start to end. It's also done through Company Portal. That can be installed through the App Store, the Apple Store, right? And just download the Company Portal. From a high level, the main steps are you download Company Portal and you go through the prompts, put in your username and password, and then it just gets you connected up. Now, there's a bunch of steps in between. You could almost intuitively just get through it, but there's documentation available that shows exactly how to do it as well. Now, for iOS enrollment to work, just as an FYI, again, you won't need to set this up again. It's a one-time setup only type thing. But we had to set up what's called an Apple MDM push certificate, which Apple devices require certificate authentication to be able to determine that hey, we have a valid MDM management tool in Intune that we want to manage that device with, and that's where we're coming from. Use this certificate to basically let that authentication happen. That allows the enrollment to happen, and DIS is going to take care of updating this because the certificate needs to be renewed annually, but they'll be taking care of that. Intune Enrollment for Android looks a lot like iOS. You just go into the Google Play Store and you download Company Portal, follow the prompts, put in your username and password, and it will enroll the device. At that point, and I should have mentioned this before, but at that point, if you have anything set up that, any conditional access rules set up for getting to Intune Enrollment as a cloud service, then that will be applied, right? And so if you said, I require it to be a compliant device, and compliant means it's got a PIN and it's encrypted, then if the device does not have a PIN or is not encrypted, then at that point they'll be prompted to change that, and it'll say you need to encrypt your device or you need to set a PIN or something there for them. And this is also one of these screens is where it pops up and says, hey, this is what Intune admins can see, and this is what they can't see. Sort of to give them a warm, fuzzy feeling that hey, what are you doing with my stuff? What can you see? Can you get any of my files? Can you see everything I do? What is this allowing you to do to my device? Now, Android also it does not have any special requirements like the push certificate that Apple requires. It does not have that requirement. Okay, so I was talking before about BYOD, bring your own device, where personal devices, and so there may be times where you want to manage your corporate devices differently than your personal devices. Now, if you don't apply policies differently to them, then the only difference between a corporate device and a personal device is how much inventory data it collects. It collects a lot more inventory data on a corporate device as far as every aspect about that device. What inventory type information, like its serial number, IMEI, like they're talking about here, or the brand, the model, the maybe how much storage space is available on it, all that sort of things, OS versions and all things of that nature, right? It collects a lot of that type of information. That's the only difference between corporate and personal. But if you actually want to apply policies differently to corporate versus personal, then it's also important to be able to distinguish between the two, so that you can create a group and you can say, I want to apply this only to corporate devices, or I only want to apply this to personal devices. In order for Intune to know the difference between a corporate versus personal device, you have to tell it somehow. It doesn't inherently know. There's no way for it to tell, that a device is corporate versus personal unless you indicate it somehow. And there's two ways to do that. One way is very manual, and that is for any particular device. Down here on the left-hand side, you can see this little screenshot here. But for any particular device, you can go in there and say, you can just click on the properties of the device and say, click the drop down and change it from personal to corporate, or the other way around. And you can designate it that way, or and this is more typical in larger organizations, you can take a CSV file or comma separated value file with a list of IMEI or serial numbers, which is just or just basically hardware ID numbers that are associated with the device. You can create a list of those and you can upload them into Intune, right? You can either manually create it yourself, or what would be a better way is easier way is to talk to whoever your vendor is that sells you your devices, your iOS or Android devices, and get the list from them. They should have a list of the devices, or whoever does your purchasing, who interacts with that person, might have this list, but you would get it from them and you would upload it into the portal, and it would designate that those devices are corporate. Intune Enrollment for Windows 7 looks a little different than the other ones, because the main difference between Windows 7 and Windows 10 is that Windows 10 is MDM aware, right? It knows what mobile device management tools like Intune, knows what they are, and it speaks the protocols that are being used by MDM tools like Intune. So MDM tools use a protocol called OMA-DM, right? And they pass information back and forth about, hey, I want to configure that setting this way, or I want to know what that is currently set to, or whether that feature is currently enabled or disabled on that device. It knows how to be managed that way, right? Now, Windows 7 does not. It doesn't inherently understand that. So with Windows 7, you actually have to install an Intune client on the machine, like a little piece of software. It's got a very small footprint, but it's still a piece that needs to be installed on there. And where you can get that from is you log into the old portal, and someone had asked earlier, what's the address of the old portal? The old portal is manage.microsoft.com, right? Now, and this one is not, it's not as modern. You can't use modern browsers to get in there. Like if I want to go there, manage.microsoft.com. I don't think it's going to be able to get in, if I recall. So here, I'll log in with my ID. All right. Bear with me a second, because I think I changed my password just recently, so I got to check. Well, okay, it already says it's unsupported browser. It doesn't get to the point where I can put it in, right? So this one I need to open up with Internet Explorer. So I'm going to go there with IE11, and then it should work. All right, so. And then I get in there. And this is what the old portal looks like. And you'll notice this message here: Silverlight MDM support has ended. MDM management through the Intune Silverlight console has been deprecated for Intune standalone customers, which is what we are. That means we're using Intune as the MDM authority that I was telling you about before. PC agent management remains in this console. So that's why for PC agent management, or the Intune client, that's why you're still going to need to come here for all the Windows 7 machines to manage them inside this portal. And it's set up in a similar way, but not exactly the same way. Like, apps are here, policies are under here. We haven't been doing a whole lot in the way of policies on Windows 7 anyway, but for the app deployment, you would want to come in here in apps, and you can see that we have some apps listed in here. They used to, and what they mean by the MDM management was they used to have the MDM as of a couple of months ago. They had all the MDM stuff that you see in the modern portal listed in here as well, and you could interact with it somewhat. But for the most part, they recommend using the new browser to get to the new portal to manage all the newer stuff. So I would say for only for when you want to manage Windows 7 would you want to come in here. Get that back up over here. Okay, get that out of the way. Okay, so that's the old portal, manage.microsoft.com. New portal is portal.azure.com. And to install the client, if you want to install the client, you need to go to the admin section of the portal under the tab that says Client Software Download, and there's a link there for that. The benefit of actually coming here and doing that is that you're actually logging into your tenant, and when you download this client software, it knows that when you install this, and I think it comes in either, you can do it, I think it is an MSI or an EXE with a quiet parameter. But it knows that when I install this, it's going to get pointed to this particular tenant. So that's handy. So you don't have to add in extra parameters that point to your tenant when you're doing the installation. And we are installing it through group policy software installation. So one of the things about that is when it installs, it will create the Intune Center here. They'll see that pop up in their start menu. You can't see it here, but in the sys tray in the bottom right corner, they'll see a little icon with that looks like this one, like a little computer down there, and you can open up this Intune Center that way as well, and it lets you get your applications and apply updates and that sort of thing. When you click on this, it just opens up a website, really, to get the company portal apps. Now, one thing that we learned through our piloting was when we install this through group policy, it doesn't normally require a reboot. If I just installed it on a machine, took the MSI or the executable, installed on a machine, it doesn't normally require a reboot. But a lot of people were, it was not, because it was being pushed down through group policies, something about that, it was not completing the process all the way. And so we had to work in a script. Again, it was another script that was running through the task scheduler, but the script would basically do a countdown and say, do you want to reboot now or do you want to wait 24 hours? What it basically said, you need to reboot sometime between now and then in the next 24 hours, and would force a reboot. And that way, and the script, would prompt them towards the end and say, hey, you've got a half hour left before it's going to get rebooted, because that finally it would force the reboot. If they ignore all the prompts, it's finally just going to force a reboot at the end. So not the most elegant solution, but it works, and we got better success rates in getting the machines enrolled and getting the client installed after we forced the reboot. So again, there's documentation available for all of how that's configured if you wanted to use it as a guideline for how you apply it. And just on a side note, I mean, another way you could do it is just put the client installation software somewhere on the network where everybody could access it and people could go out to the network, share and install. I mean, there's different ways you could apply it. If you have some sort of tool, some sort of management tool that you can use for electronic software distribution, down to your machines, then that would probably be a better option than what we're doing. But for lack of a better tool, we used group policy. We already talked about these, don't really need to talk too much about them, but just different types of configuration policies that you can create, configuration profiles, like doing a 4-digit PIN, conditional access, and then the compliance policies that works closely with the conditional access. So let's talk a little bit about Office. So one of the tools that we're using as like a preparatory tool to install Office is called the Office Readiness Toolkit, or we've been referring to as ORT for short inside the project. Although I don't think you'll see that on any Microsoft site anywhere to say ORT, but ORT is basically it's a free tool that Microsoft provides that you can use to run on machines where you're planning on upgrading it. Like maybe it's currently running Office 2010, or maybe it's currently running Office 2016, the MSI version, and you're going to upgrade it and install Office 365 Click to Run. Which the difference there is MSI is the traditional package that you're familiar with, that if you've configured Office deployments before, you can type in like setup.exe/admin, and it brings up the tool that lets you customize. The Office customization tool lets you customize how Office gets installed. That's the traditional way. The new Click to Run way uses setup.exe with an XML file for the configuration of it, and so it's kind of a different way of installing it, but you are upgrading to a different version, regardless if it's Click to Run or whatever. You're upgrading to a different version of Office. This tool is meant to basically give you some insight into what possible compatibility issues you might run into with the new version of Office. And it's done in terms of two things: VBA macros and add-ins. So if you're using VBA macros currently in Office 2013, and you're using some add-ins currently that are maybe some special add-ins, maybe third-party add-ins or something like that, and you want to check to be sure, hey, is this going to work? We're gonna upgrade this guy to Office 365. Are these still going to work? Then you can run this tool, and it will tell you, whether or not it's going to have problems, in the new version. Now, it doesn't always know right off. Technically, from a technical standpoint, it doesn't always know, well, it's going to have this exact, problem. Sometimes it just has a general idea of how adopted a particular add-in or VBA macro is right? So you can look at these reports here, and you can see down here, like it's looking at the add-ins. Like this is a summary page, but you can click on all these little tabs along the bottom and get deeper information about the machines that you've run it on, and it'll tell you, for those particular add-ins, how highly adopted or not they are, right? And it determines it by number of machines that have reported in. Using Windows telemetry, they're able to gather like information about machines and what add-ins and things that they're running, and they can determine like, hey, we've determined that I don't know, over 10,000 or over 100,000 Windows 10 machines that have Office 365 are running this add-in successfully, right? And so that kind of gives you, or maybe it doesn't know that they're running it successfully, but it knows that they're running it, right? And so if it has a really high adoption rate, you can get at least a good feeling that that's probably going to be okay. It's probably going to work just fine. It's still good to kind of like take it slow, like if you have users that are using a lot of special VBA macros and add-ins, and you run this tool first, you get the report back, everything looks pretty good, I would still maybe start a little slow, right? Only maybe you just do a couple of those users and make sure everything goes okay first, and then deploy it to everybody else. But it's a good way to get good information back. ORT supports Office 2003 or later, and the way we deployed it was again through group policy, right? It installed this is documented in a CR, but it installs an executable on the machine, and then it runs a command that will create a report on a network share, and then when you can use the ORT tool to then compile the reports and give you back this one Excel spreadsheet that could cover 100 machines that you've run it on all in one report. Or you could just run it on a single machine and just get the output for just that one machine. Just depends on how you do it. Okay, so the Office 365 package itself. So Office 365 ProPlus Click to Run can be, we've created the package different ways depending on the capabilities. Usually with the more modern operating systems, Microsoft makes it easier and easier. The more modern it is, they're able to make it easier on you. But the further you go back, typically the more difficult it is. For Windows 10 1703 or later, there's a built-in app type called the Office 365 App Suite that all you need to do is go in and check boxes. It's really nice. You can create a package for this in like minutes. You just go in and say, I want to create an Office 365 ProPlus package, and I want to choose what products I want to put in there. We did remove OneDrive Groove. You see there's two OneDrives listed, and it creates two OneDrives on the machine, and we determined that this OneDrive does not work, so we don't want to distract users from using it when they need to be using this other one here to actually access the OneDrive. So anyway, we took that out, but we're installing everything else. We're not installing Project or Visio. We're not installing Project Online, Desktop Client, or Visio Pro for Office 365. We are instead installing Office. We're installing 2013 versions of it, Project 2013 and Visio 2013. On machines that need it. Because one thing to note here of importance is pretty big importance is this box here. Remove other versions of Office, MSI versions, that is, from end user devices. And this is it's a really great thing that we definitely want to use, right? Because otherwise we'd have to manually, or in some other way, we'd have to uninstall the previous version of Office. You can't. Well, okay, so you can. Some versions of Office can coexist with with some MSI versions of Office can coexist with some click-to-run versions of Office 365, right? But typically it's not recommended. But Microsoft supports it, but it's not recommended to run those side by side. It's recommended and sometimes required to remove that previous version of Office. Typically, it has to do with version numbers. Office 2013 or older can work with Office 365, but Office 2016 MSI will not coexist with Office 365. So if you have, the point is that we're removing the other MSI versions, and that means Project and Visio too. It will remove those. So if they have Project 2016 or Visio 2016 running on their machines, those will be removed. And so right now, the process for getting that back on there is to reinstall Project 2013 and or Visio 2013, because that can coexist with the click-to-run version of Office 365 that we're deploying. Anything else to say here? You have to choose in here when you choose this whether it's 64-bit or 32-bit Office. We mostly are deploying 64-bit wherever possible, and how often the update channels come through there, which we chose monthly for this deployment. So now, for deploying it, when we've created the app suite, it's out there as a package. The way we're deploying it is as required to the device. So we're actually pushing it down as part of a deployment, so it appears on the device. Now, comparing that, let's compare 1703 or later versions of Windows 10 with earlier versions. With earlier versions, they don't understand that app suite app type that I just showed you. So we had to kind of create a special package for earlier versions. Now, we haven't had to use this very much. There's not a whole lot of 1607 or earlier at DIS, but we ran some scripts in AD to bring back information about what versions of Windows 10 are being run across the whole state of Arkansas, and there is a good number of machines that are running 1607 or earlier. So we put that out there as an option. Now, you may recall earlier I said you can only install MSIs within Intune, and they just recently came up with executables. So we were stuck with a problem here in that the setup.exe for installing Office 365 click to run, there is no MSI. There's only an executable, and you have to use an accompanying XML file for the configuration of it. So there was no way to create this package, except Microsoft provides this Office 365 ProPlus installation toolkit over here that you can go to this website, and this is all in the documentation as well, but you can go to this website and you can run this tool that allows you to specify everything you want to do, similar to the checkboxes, except you're using like a little wizard, and you tell it all the things that you want to have in the package, and it takes that whole configuration and it wraps up the executable into an MSI wrapper, right? So what we were able to do is create that in an MSI wrapper and upload it into Intune as an MSI and deploy it that way. Now, the only weakness there is that we were not able to deploy it as required to device. You have to deploy this under the user context. Now, we don't want to deploy it as required to the user, because that would mean that whatever device the user logs into, if it's an Intune enrolled device, it's going to install Office on that machine. So we didn't want to do that, so we've made it available to the user. So in that case, the user will have to go into the company portal. You'll have to point them to it, and they'll have to install it from the company portal to get that. Another weakness of this method is, and I'm a little stymied as to why, but because I think this is just configuring an XML for you. The wizard's just configuring an XML and then, putting it all into the MSI wrapper. But there's no option to uninstall previous versions of of Office, of the MSI, previous MSI versions of Office. There's no option to use that when using this tool. So if you have to do something like this, there's no automatic uninstallation of previous versions of Office. You will have to manually uninstall the previous version of Office on those machines. Now, ironically, if we go back to Windows 7, it supports a more modern method of deployment than it does in older versions of Windows 10. We're able to actually create an executable. We can use the setup.exe and tell it to use an XML file, and so that works fine, right? We can use that. We can deploy it as required to the device. That works okay, and that's because it's using the Intune client. It's not being managed as an MDM agent. In theory, you could even manage your Windows 10 machines with the Intune client as well. The only problem there is that there's a limit of how many Intune clients a single tenant can manage. The upper limit is 7,000, according to Microsoft. So if you add up all the machines in the state, you're going to be over that limit, and so you really need to manage the Windows 10 machines as MDM devices wherever possible. But Microsoft actually recommends that anyway. They recommend going forward that you manage Windows 10 machines as MDM devices. That's the whole direction they're going. And someday, this whole idea of Intune clients is just going to go away. So it's usually best to follow suit with what Microsoft is, the direction that they're taking, so as to not cause yourself pain down the road. Azure Information Protection Client, it's just the thing to be known here is that this is something that I did not set up on the back end, but there was a requirement that the client be installed. It has to be installed. There's packages in Intune to do this, and it's documented. But the idea is that we need to install the client after Office 365 ProPlus has been installed. And when you install it, you'll see this icon pop up here, this icon to protect. You'll see an AIP viewer in the start menu. Those are the indications you'll see. When you open up Word, for example, you'll see it in this ribbon across the top. Those are the indications that show you that it's installed. That just as a brief overview of what it does, it basically detects if there's sensitive data inside a particular document. So if you write a document, it's got credit card information in there, for example, you can set up a policy that determines what happens with that document. You can either say, just warn the user and say, hey, this should be labeled as confidential, or it should be protected. It just helps to protect sensitive data is what it's there for. The AIP client is a free download from Microsoft's site, so that's where we got that from to be able to install it. And that's the end of this presentation. So we can now move into another session of Q&A. If anybody has any questions.